How many of you have been to Poets House before? Okay, yeah. So you kind of know what we're about. We're a library and community center that is dedicated to increasing the art of poetry, increasing access to the art of poetry, but also increasing the possibilities for poetry and what poetry can do. And I think that events like tonight and the exhibit upstairs, Mary Ruefle's Erasures exhibit, which I hope you all have a chance to see, are doing exactly that. So thank you again for coming here. I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, John Vincler, who is our library director and the curator of the exhibition upstairs. John?
Thanks, Rob. Lee and Christine, do you want to just go ahead and come up and we can, yeah. We're gonna have this is gonna be a conversation tonight, so let's make this communal. Let me see here.
You're me in the middle. There you go.
Use your microphone.
Oh, I get my own.
Oh, yeah, okay, great. Don't have enough hands. Okay, so thank you all for being here tonight, and for this event, which celebrates the exhibition on Mary Ruefle's Erasures, which is upstairs. I encourage you to all see it after the show, as Rob also just said. And thank you for your support of Poets House by showing up today. Tell your friends, and any other way you can help support us. We really appreciate it. When I thought about poetry and collage and artists who would have something to say about the intersection of these two subjects, I thought immediately of the two people who I'm up here with today. So let's see here. I thought immediately of Mary Manning's work, and more on this later. But I went to contact Lee about participating in tonight's event. I saw that they had just posted an image of a Mary Ruefle poem. And this synchronicity seemed astonishingly unsurprising. And I just thought, of course they did. I have written about Lee's work as an art critic on at least on 3 occasions. The first time was a review for the New York Times of their 2022 Canada Gallery show. And I have sources especially when I was reviewing a lot for the New York Times. There was always kind of like young hip art people that I would talk to and say, what's good? What are you seeing? And I remember at that point, everyone was like, you got to go see the Mary Manning show. And I went and saw it, and I was blown away. And Lee's been one of my favorite photographers ever since. So more of a straight bio. Lee Mary Manning models a method of close and care-filled looking in carefully arranged juxtapositions of 35 millimeter analog prints. Manning's most recent book, Kiss of the Sun, was made for the occasion of their 3rd exhibition at Canada Gallery, which I think I also reviewed for 2025. Or it was 2024 to 2025. When I thought of poets and collage, I similarly immediately thought of Christine Hugh's work. There was a connection in the spirit of her work to that of Ruefle's that I sensed. We can talk about whether that's true or not, or you feel that. And I know that Christine's collages are found in the books of many others, in addition to the collage poems that Christine will share with us tonight. Christine Shan Shan Hou is an artist and poet based in New Jersey. Their publications include Playdate, White Columns in 2022, The Joy of Terror are both in the Swallowing, After Hours editions 2021, Community Garden for Lonely Girls, Grammar Poetry in 2017, and I'm Sunlight by the Song Cave, one of my favorite poetry presses in our chapbook collection, which I found. Many of these books are right next to me here from our collection. Their artwork has been exhibited at White Columns and other galleries in New York. Her 4th collection of poetry, A Promise, is forthcoming from Blush this year. I'm honored to be in conversation with both of you, and thanks again for being here with us. I thought we could begin with a few short readings. Christine, do you want to kick things off with a reading of, I think I'm going to do 2 Mary Ruefle poems and 2 of your own?
Me and Lee brought the same book. True.
I'm going to read 2 short poems by Mary. Yes, love her. Thank you for having me here. Are we alone? Is it safe to speak? Dear unknown friend, I know I am real to you, and though you aren't that real to me, without you, I would not exist. Certainly, I would never have stepped into this nutmeg grater and become a pile of fine, woodsy particles. It occurs to me we are walking piles of dust, you and I, and still it smells as sweet as summer winds off the coast of Zanzibar, and the sails are up and off we dash into the brine of our contentment. I'm glad you know me well. When I fall asleep, curling up in a little ball, will you take me home and hold me in the palm of your hand, posthumously, anonymously, and when the time is right, blow me away? Concerning essential existence. The horse mounted the mare slowly and precisely, and then stopped. He was profoundly disturbed by a piece of straw. He was profoundly distracted by the sad toy upside down in the tree. He was profoundly disengaged by half a cloud in the corner of his wet eye. And then he continued, "Nothing is forgot by lovers except who they are." So good. Okay. Okay, and then I'll read, my own poems. Okay, so I'll just read 2 haikus in my upcoming book, A Promise, which will be out in August. And these just, I don't know, they really spoke to Mary's poems. I don't know why. Sky, empty vessel for the sun. What enters big cloud never comes out. One out of my 4 bushes chose death while I was away on spring break.
Get a poem.
So I chose one of Mary's poems, and then I might read a little bit of a press release I wrote that I think kind of connects to Mary's work, or just to poetry, connects my work to poetry a little bit. This is called, by the way, that was so beautiful, and thank you for having me, and it's so nice to be here with everybody. And I hadn't looked at the weather before coming here, but this poem's called After a Rain. They noticed, you see, that I was a noticing kind of person, and so they left the dictionary out in the rain, and I noticed it. I noticed it was open to the rain page. Much harm had come to it. It had aged to the age of 95 paper years, and I noticed rainbow follows rain in the book, just as it does on Earth. And I noticed it was silly of me to notice so much, but I noticed there is no stationery in heaven. I noticed an infant will grip your hand like there is no tomorrow, while the very aged will give you a weightless hand for the same reason. I noticed in a loving frenzy that some are hemlocked and others are not. Believe me, yours unspeakably obliged. I noticed whoever I met in my search for entrance into this world went too far, but that was their destination. And I noticed the road followed roughly the route of a zipper around a closed case. I noticed the sea was human, but no one believed me, and that some birds have the wingspan of an inch, and some flowers the petal span of a foot, yet the two are very well suited to each other. I noticed that. There are 8 major emotional states, but I forget 7 of them. I can hear the ambulance singing, but I do not think it will stop for me, because I notice the space between the waterfall and the rock, and I am safe there, resting in the cradle of all there is, the way a seahorse, when it is tired, will tie its tail to a seaweed and rest. And there has not been, in my opinion, enough astonishment over this fact. So now I will withdraw my interest in the whole external world while I'm in the noticing mode. Notice how I talk to you just as if you were sitting in my lap, and not as if it were raining, not as if there were a sheet of water between us or anything else. She's so awesome. She's so awesome that actually I titled this last show "Kiss of the Sun" after the poem "Kiss of the Sun," which I contemplated reading, but I encourage you to watch Mary read it on YouTube. It's really just mind-blowing. And funny enough, when I titled the show "Kiss of the Sun," I realized I'd already titled 2 other works "Kiss of the Sun," which I love that I give myself permission to do that. So, but in thinking about, after I talked to John about doing this, and poetry's come up a lot in conversations around the work I make, and poetry is really important to me and ends up in titles and such. But my first show with Canada was in 2018, and I titled it "Love." And I wrote my own press release, and I drew heavily from this book by John Berger called "And Our Faces, My Heart, Briefest Photos." And so I'll just read, this is just a 2-paragraph press release, and then I'll read the quote by John Berger. Love is not only a noun, it touches, and it is vision, and it is also a verb. Love is the action here. This is the condition of making my stuff. It is an act of will, conscious or subconscious, to record, place, and connect. I carry my camera with me everywhere. It is my devotion. It calms me to record and share information about my world. These small prints get shuffled around and held. They are by necessity concrete and analog. Like gathering proof, I also keep scraps of other evidence from place and time. Papers, fabrics, bags, feathers, insect wings. The beloved pieces and pictures together become a song lyric or notes for something I might be too afraid to say out loud. Maybe these are stories, but really they are more like poems. These strung together images attempt to do the work of words. In the same way that a poem brings together what is scattered, I hope that these photographs will mirror this labor. And here's the John Berger quote. Poetry makes language care because it renders everything intimate. This intimacy is the result of the poem's labor, the result of the bringing together into intimacy of every act and noun and event and perspective to which the poem refers. There's often nothing more substantial to place against the cruelty and indifference of the world than this caring.
Thank you for that. It's beautiful. I'm going to read 2 paragraphs and a sentence from an essay I wrote for the Paris Review called A Private Literature, about literary manuscripts and the potential magic, I think, in literary manuscripts. I realized preparing for this conversation that Mary Ruefle is partly responsible for my coming back to writing. I was writing poems and reviews in my 20s and editing literary magazines, but dropped out and became a rare book librarian. And it was a little over 10 years ago that I kind of found my way back to writing. And I think the weird poetic essays of Mary Ruefle are partly responsible for this. It kind of showed me a new way of writing that interests me, and just a new way of engaging the world. And this kind of chimes a lot with the intimacy of what you just said in Berger. The essay was maybe an odd one on a show at the Drawing Center in 2014, curated by Claire Gilman, who's now at the Morgan, on the manuscripts of Emily Dickinson and Robert Walser. Was looking at literary manuscripts as drawings, which was really interesting. And it was my essay was also partly a review of Susan Hou's book, Spontaneous Particulars. As an editor, that sounds like a mess to combine these 2 things together. But here are the 2 paragraphs deep in the essay on Mary Ruefle. It's free online. It's called a Private Literature, if you want to read the rest of it. Since the exhibition of Dickinson and Walser's manuscripts, I've been seeking out their work everywhere and seeking insight from others into it. While reading Mary Ruefle's essay, My Emily Dickinson, an essay begun without knowledge of Susan Howe's book of the same title, I was taken in by Ruefle's observations, her literary collecting and braiding. She links Emily Dickinson to Anne Frank, and like Howe in her book, to the Bronte sisters. Facts relating to these figures, brief reflections and observations on their work, fragments of their writing all brush up against one another, but the sections end enigmatically with lists, such as a thimble, an acorn, a quarter, and many, many daffodils. Or an envelope, addressed but otherwise empty, a piece of gum in silver paper, a packet of nasturtium seeds, and a button. As I read the essay, these lists initially perplexed me. While reading, I could easily set them aside and move on, taking greedily what I wanted from the essay to use for my own purposes. But by the end, there was much in the essay, but little about Emily Dickinson. Ruefle admits to this, confessing, Emily Dickinson is nobody's business but my own, and I will not share her with anyone. I would no more tell you about my relationship with her poems than I would tell you about a love affair. If she is yours, I hope you feel the same way. But then, quite remarkably, what amounts to a literary magic trick, she adds, but she has a common grave, and I like to go there and leave things, and when I do, I see that other people have done the same. These lists, observed offerings, things left behind. I want to show some images, but maybe this is we can pick up with. I think Mary Ruefle, especially in the show, I guess this is always in her work, and I guess I wrote about it 10 years ago, is a great collector and observer of lost and neglected objects. So we can think about how that relates to your work and to her work. But let's look at some images. We'll start with Mary Ruefle's. I'm going to stand to the side here while I do this. So this is a poster to the show, which has one of her erasures. How is this working? Okay. This one's not shown in the show. I knew Mary's work as a poet and loved it. I was not prepared for how wonderful her visual art was. It was. I feel spoiled because I got to pour through the books before we decided what we were putting in the case. And this juxtaposition of the milk and the moon, which I was telling Lee, this reminds me very much of the work in Lee's poems. That's a Freudian slip. Lee's photographs of the juxtapositions where things just make sense together, and then you try to work through why, and that can be a deep, layered experience. Let's see here. Okay, this is intentionally blank because there is a mirror, a cracked, antiqued mirror that you cannot see your reflection in any longer. And on the mirror, it's in the first case. Where's the laptop? I'm trying to. Okay, is just the line cut out, every line of poetry, and I like this is the like my favorite object in the show, a cracked mirror with a single crack in it that no longer reflects anything. That just says every line of poetry. Please look at it and think about it. I love her cover pages, how seriously she takes them. So she's transforming other books in these works into her own. And her drawing is also really, really wild. And there are things like this that are like, it says words up in a man's head all planned out, ready to be nailed together. But it's just this stuff, this magical, like almost, it's not glitter, but these particles she's placed in there and glued into the page. I love, just to give you a taste of what's there. Okay, now let's look at some of Christine and Lee's work. Mike, can you hit forward on the laptop? Great. Christina, I think your photos are next, or your works are next. Can you go one more, Mike? Do you want to read these, or just want to have people look at them?
I'll read them. This is the first time I'm reading them out loud. I've always just kind of thought of them I don't want to say strictly, but specifically as visual artworks. And you thought God protects delicate skin.
Next one.
Golden lights, jealous wife, you've come a long way, baby. Hospitable house, so nice to come home to a big baby like you.
Okay, next are three of Lee's photo assemblages. I've written about Lee's work 3 times, and I still don't know exactly how to call them. Compositions. Go ahead, Mike. Do you want to say anything about these, Lee? Sorry to put you on the spot. I feel like I could say a lot about them. I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I'll leave it to you, really. I mean, I made the joke to John earlier that I didn't memorize the titles to each of these. So if you need to ask me later, I'll look it up.
So the thing you'll notice about Lee's compositions is that there are multiple photos put together, and I've always thought, looking at them, that they operate very much like poems. The whole idea of like no ideas but in things. That's like the way the images accrue, and you can think about like line breaks and ordering in Lee's work. Show the next one, Mike. So how many prints are in this one, Lee?
5.
5.
Yeah. In 2020, I lived in this neighborhood, so this sort of sunrise, sunset cement shape is just at the bottom of West Broadway, where it runs into 6th Avenue. It's a fun fact for anyone that lives in the neighborhood.
So I think I just said that we'd talk about Mary's Ruefle's relationship to lost and forgotten objects, and I think we've talked about attention. It was in Christine's poem about attention. Was it, or was it Lee's?
Mine.
Yours, yeah.
Noticing.
And your attention. I mean, I think part of the pleasure of Lee's photographs is that you see the world, and your attention is brought to how things connect and things you might not other look at. When Lee first visited the exhibition, you took a photograph of this very 90s lamp that was in our conference room, and I was like, of course Lee thought to photograph this object that was not the most spectacular object in the room, but it was the thing that brought Lee's attention, and I think used a flash, and I was like, oh, it's going to have a good shadow. Maybe it did, or maybe it didn't. Can you show the next? Those hazelnuts and chocolate? That's what it is.
Yep. This was an Easter egg in. I happened to be in Rome over Easter, and they really do it up for that holiday.
And is this photograph? The person's shirt says God, right? And,
yeah, it says God in one print, and then it says dog overlaid. And it's an old Eckhouse Lotta T-shirt, and the actual foil, it's mounted on a piece of foil that kind of mirrors the foil in the other image, and it's foil that I carried back from a residency in Ireland, and it's like a really thin wrapper of like a chocolate marshmallow. But yeah. It serves as the, he's the chocolate Easter egg in that photo, and with his God dog shirt.
We could talk about whether we think these photographs are sorts of poems. But Christine, I wanted to ask you a question that I asked Mary when I had a conversation with Mary, and I called her up, and the first question I asked her was, how does your erasure practice relate to your poetry practice? So I want to ask you how your poetry practice relates to your collage practice.
So I came through to poetry by looking and writing about visual art, and then I came to visual art by poetry. And this is the first time I feel like my poetry and my visual practice are directly colliding. I kind of like with Mary and her lost and found objects, I like to use, again, like materials that are eventually going to be discarded. So a lot of them are very old magazines that people will sell in bulk from like the 1970s and 1980s. And I'm just very attracted to those worlds and those colors. There's something nice about shutting out the outside and the internet and then going inside to this very specific object and trying to construct a world within it. So I kind of pick up pieces of language, like a collage, and then I assemble them together. I think one of the ways I describe poetry was like every day waking up in like a field of like flowers or just in nature, just an open field, right? And then just kind of noticing things throughout the day and picking things up. So it's like a flower, a stone, the wing of a dead animal or a dead bird. And then I feel like the poet's job, and I see Mary doing this a lot in her work, is just going home and building like a bouquet, like just putting it all together without even thinking about what's pretty and what's not pretty. And so I think the way I was approaching my poem collages was the same way, of just looking through these publications, gravitating towards colors, gravitating towards fonts, just various colors and shapes, and then piecing them together in a childlike way, but with like existential dread. Yeah.
Lee, so I think of your work as related to collage, and I've heard you speak, kind of complicate that in conversations you've had before. But I wanted to ask you if there was any connection you felt in your photography practice to erasure.
Somewhat, yeah. I mean, it's funny because choosing to work in this, like, these really old formats that aren't super high tech, like I'm not taking the film and getting it developed and then processing it in digital and taking and cropping things. And so like the erasure is like is like in the frame, you know, is like the actual just like deciding where that crop is based on my like body moving towards or away from what I'm taking a picture of. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm like
So do you work with, we think about like the relationship between the negative and an erasure, but also do you get contact sheets or your negatives? Are you working with, like, do you get all, like when you have a camera in your lap, which I love, it's on top of your phone.
Yeah.
And it's a film camera. You use primarily point and shoot film cameras, right? Mm-hmm. Exclusively or primarily?
I'd say nearly exclusively,
Okay.
although I'm open to change.
And so do you print, like, will you print every single photo in that?
Yeah,
Well, okay.
I mostly print. I make these prints at a particular family-run photo lab in downtown that makes. It's one of the only ones that still do the 3.5 by 5 size prints because they just work for me. I have smaller hands and like, and so a big stack of them just I pull out the ones I like from a roll and then they just become stacks on my desk. I primarily work like tabletop, and then they're just kind of like shuffled out onto tables or foam core boards in my studio / apartment. And yeah.
So Yeah, in Mary Ruefle's erasure books, the erasing comes from kind of selecting words, you know?
Yeah.
So it seems like you have this body, you have this corpus of photographs, and then the chosen ones kind of get brought together, right?
Yeah.
It's kind of that selecting. So one of the things that characterizes Mary Ruefle's erasure poems, the poems that emerge, it seems they're very funny. First of all, there's a whole case of postcards with little captions on them that kind of function like New Yorker cartoons, I mean, she's very funny in all of her work, but one of the themes that emerges sometimes there's kind of like an existential dread to some of the humor, but then some of it seems to be like about writer's block, kind of like what to do when you can't think of words. So I think having another practice in looking at her work for a long time, having another way of working is a way of keeping working. And so I wonder if that resonates at all with you, or just maybe the question is, what do you do when you feel like you can't? Christine, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, actually, when I felt stuck with my writing is when I started to make the poem collages. I never saw them as erasure poems as much as like excavated poems, although they pare it down to like the same minimal language as Mary's work does. And I think I just needed to draw from a bank of words that were not in my, that weren't like bubbling in my head at the time. So when I'm looking at these old magazines that will eventually be thrown away and disappear, it's just like picking up fragments and putting them together as a place of play and humor, and to remind myself that play and humor can exist in writing poetry, which I'm a poet, that's a little hard to do. I really kind of relate to her sense of play, and as a means of entering back into a practice, kind of how like you were saying that she's one of the people responsible for getting you back into writing. It's almost like a permission. It's just like a permission to play. Absolutely. As a way to re-enter a space.
Lee, what do you do when you can't?
Yeah, I mean, I just love that. I really kind of relate to this, going back through, even having those rolls of film that I look through once and then I go back through and maybe I'll see something I didn't see before. But if I'm really stuck or feel, I don't know, it's a funny thing because, I mean, I was going to say, sometimes I'll watercolor or something, but that's just not super honest, because really, I just, I think I still feel a lot of, confusion around what flow is and what flow isn't, as far as being, making things. And, sometimes looking at YouTube is what I need to do to make something new, or I don't know, it's confusing. So, but something visual generally will usually get me out of it, or always travel, even if it's just leaving New York City. It's like a psychic crack where I just suddenly notice things way differently, and that'll get me going.
I think of your work as kind of about the street, you're kind of out in the world, and it's we see how you see. But I also think about your work as always associated with dance and performance, but then also poetry. I mean, dance performance will come up you'll have Merce Cunningham dancers, or sometimes they're identifiable in your. But poetry, how does that look when you? So sometimes you're looking at YouTube videos. When do you reach for poetry in your practice?
I mean, really, like, I don't know if it's like a conscious, like, now I'm going to look at but I mean, I guess there are certain times, like, I really think one of the most juicy, fun parts of making, like, fine art or even publications is the opportunity to look through words and song lyrics and poems and kind of like hack into this world that I have a connection to and I'm thinking about. But really for a long time, especially around COVID, I like couldn't read narrative work. I felt like my brain only had the capacity for poetry. And it was pretty healing, but yeah, I guess if I'm reaching for it, it would be like when I'm like in that part of the show or publication process where it's time to name things.
Christine, I think you traced a chronology of art and poetry in your work. How has working across mediums given you permission, and has it changed your compositional approach to writing poems? Do you find analogs with other modes of working?
Okay, I'm sorry. Repeat that again.
So how does if you has the work you've done with visual art collages, has that impacted how you write poems? And have you noticed like a change in your work over time?
Yes, the poem collages have taught me that less is more. I mean, my poems went from being like all my poems are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. And one of the ways, if I'm in like a writer's block rut, aside from making these really short poems from these collaged, from these words pulled from old publications, I also like to write haiku to get it back in. Just sometimes a little bit of structure can bring you back into the practice in the game. I mean, it's not even a little bit of structure. Like a haiku is kind of like hard set rules. But yeah, that can help you bring me back into the game. And then I'm sorry, I lost your question again.
No, I think you're answering it. Is your new book all short poems?
Oh yes, mostly yes, they're all pretty short poems. The book coming out, and my previous book also had haikus as kind of pauses in the book, like kind of a pause, take a moment, breathe, think about life and death, and then jump back into some childlike wonder.
Wait, I love that you called them pauses, because when I've been asked about like playing with other ephemera in like assemblages, I often think of like the papers or the insect wing as pauses of like where you're going around and you're image, pause, that's a napkin, the image, you know? That's kind of cool. I love that.
One of the objects upstairs in the exhibition gave me quite a start when I first interacted with it as the objects arrived here at Poets House. I opened it up and it was a box full of dead bugs. You can see it. It's in the one square flat case. And it's interesting that you've mentioned dead bird wings and you mentioned insect wings, I think. So do we? I don't know what to say about that. Besides, I love these synchronicities. Talked about the noticing mode. I guess you put me in the noticing mode. One of the things that was haunting, I think this is from Lee, what you read, is the line where Mary Ruefle says there's no stationary in heaven, which seems like a kind of like is that heaven for Mary Ruefle if there's no stationary? It's kind of a haunting image. Want to open it up to questions now? We can do it.
I really enjoy both of your work and how they interact with each other and with Mary Ruefle's. I was curious how you source your found objects or work, and maybe how the sources, how they vary, impact the process of working with them.
Do you want to answer first? Oh, I get my sources from eBay. There are a lot of people just selling so much junk, and I just think about, like, I can't. Yeah, I've always wanted to kind of play around with sculpture, but the idea of things just existing in landfills gives me a lot of anxiety, and just adding to it. So I like using things that are going to be discarded anyway, and and also just like the colors and the publication at the time, the way gender was written about that time. It just, I guess I could kind of relate to it as someone who identifies as queer and non-binary and went through the whole queer stuff and then came out the other side as a heterosexual traditional housewife. So I like looking at these publications and almost poking at them as like a joke. Like, look where I ended up, kind of back in the beginning here, a woman working in the kitchen.
Yeah, as far as, I mean, my partner is here and can testify that, like, I'm often in the noticing mode. And so it just means, like, most of the stuff I'm finding is literally just on the ground. Or, you know, I mean, like, thinking about stationery in heaven, you know, like, I think about, yeah, like, I'm sad there might not be stationery in heaven, like noticing beautiful pieces of paper being places and kind of searching out that stuff, or just always, yeah, kind of alert to that.
I'm happy there's no stationery in heaven, because that means you no longer have to be a writer, which is like kind of a punishment in some ways.
Is it? Any other questions? Yeah.
Lee mentioned about poetry during COVID, and for me too, it really was a comfort every morning to start the day like that, and I just wonder why.
Reading or writing?
I was reading, but
Okay.
why is it a comfort?
Why for me? I think it was just abstract enough and kind of like of another world, of another way to express language, even, you know, just that it, like, I'm not sure how to say why it helped me so much, but it really tethered me back to like some sort of feeling grounded or like hopeful, because I had a really rough COVID, and yeah, just the brevity of it, and I don't know, the form just really like was soothing.
It's also kind of like a tight package that you can consume.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of poetry during COVID as well. I had just had my second kid in 2020,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just in between like the bouncing and the feeding and all that stuff. All I really had the attention span for was like a poem. I tried to even like read a short story over, you know, multiple sittings, and I just couldn't connect what I last read to what I was reading next. And I found with poetry, it was just like a present. It was just like a little package.
I connect to that.
There's something about Mary Ruefle's work where it will be so funny and so there's such ease to so much of it, but then she'll really hit you with some like a very blunt thought about death or something funny about death, but then we'll kind of keep at a different register, and it's that recognition of a kind of the full span of life and experience, but then having this kind of wit and this noticing and this, and it's like with Mary's work, there's always, it's like you're like she's whispering in your ear, like you're there's a kind of intimacy and a kind of privilege of being on the other end of receiving what she's saying. At least I feel in reading her, and it's very present in the objects upstairs too.
And it feels like home. She's very comforting and I mean, there are some poets where you do read with like a dictionary, you need like a dictionary and the internet with you, but it's so conversational and it's so tender. So even though when it addresses ideas of death, of if her mother dying or her father dying, like there's a tenderness to it without a sense of indulgence, right? The tenderness comes from pointing out by picking up the small details that she just has noticed, it like picking up the flower in the field.
Yeah. David, do you have a question? Yeah. Great.
Thank you very much for this. If I understood correctly, both of you described the process as sort of building up the collection of images and text and then working on assembling. But I was wondering if in some cases you start a work and decide, I really wish I had this particular image or this set of words, and then go out and search or create a piece that would fit into the composition that you were working on.
I don't ever do it that way, but I did, funny enough, have an experience recently where I was working on a commission, and so I worked with a photo editor for the first time for a publication, and then they were like, I really need like a photo of this. Do you have this? And luckily, like I just at this point have amassed so many images that I could kind of like manage to gather up what she was asking for. But there was a point where I was like, am I gonna have to go out and like try to find or take a picture of like a fireplace? Like it feels so weird to me, but because I just don't normally work that way.
I think you also collect similar. I've never had the experience of doing it the other way around because the world is so overwhelming. I lost my train of thought. I apologize.
Any other questions?
How do you sort through your images? If you have so many of them, do you have like a street images or still life images, or how? Because you must have a lot.
This is the thing that haunts me. My partner's also laughing really hard right now. This is really haunting because I have that is not my strong suit. Like I've been meaning to, start some sort of archival project where I put some order to everything. But right now it's, at one point there were loosely stacks of like, this is people, this is nature, this is trash cans. Like then it all gets reshuffled again. And so it is like this really exciting thing when like right now I'm working on making some work for something in September, and which is really last minute, and everything's just out, and it's just a big grid of like, hundreds of photos from like the last 2 months, but then all these other photos from like the last 15 years, or like, I don't know, like I dug into them pretty well for the last show I did, which was really fun. But I kind of primarily just keep working on like what the latest images are. And someday I'm going to have to go through and really go for it.
And one other question, sorry, I've got lots of questions. Do you reuse images like a
Yes.
vocabulary, so that depending on whether brown is the theme or chocolate is the theme or
Yeah.
tinfoil is the theme? Or
I have been at times recycling images or reworking them into, like taking something that I've sometimes, but rarely, but sometimes work with single images and, show single images. And then it's fun to give myself permission to then take them and, use a smaller version of that and reassemble it into another thing. And especially, it became especially a project in making my publications. Like I made a really big 300-page book of just tons of these assemblages in no chronological order. And then that was really fun to reshuffle in images that had been in other works.
Thank you.
I think managing an archive is like 30% of an artist, especially if you're producing. I produce a lot. I have like thousands of collages. I can do like 25 of those poem collages in one day really easily. I just work quickly like that. And similar with you working with a photo editor, being like, oh, I actually have a picture that works. I think last year I was asked to design a tarot deck card, and I just drew from just massive collection, this archive of collages that I did, and was able to find one that represented every card. So it's like you end up also just, yeah, so even though there's like erasure, just the act of collecting, like Mary was collecting these old books, are a huge part of it, right? And then archiving it to remember.
Any other questions? No. Maybe as a concluding thought, David, actually, this is a conversation we had. We were talking about whether when to use the word poetic in art reviewing. And David said to me, well, if it's art, isn't it ultimately poetic? Like, what does that even mean? And I was thinking about it when you said that to me, and I think it's absolutely right. Like, what does that mean when we use it? I was thinking back, like, because I know that that's the thing that I think about. I was like, I think I described Lee's work in a review as poetic, and I think I had in mind that it had like the structure of a poem. But what is a poetic artwork? Like, how do we feel about the word poetic as applied to the visual? What does that mean?
I used to write visual art criticism, and I feel like I would just throw that word in when I wanted, when I felt like I could relate to a type of like flow that was moving within the work, and not just like a visual flow, but like following a train of thought, opposed to following like the strokes of a paintbrush or something like that. So when I think about poetic artwork, I think about how I write poetry, of kind of jumping from one area of my, just, drawing from all these things in my head, and then kind of seeing a similarity of the way an artist approaches an object or a subject.
How do you feel about that word applied to your work?
I mean, I'm always actually really like, I take it as a good thing, but I think about like when, you mentioned dance, and so it's like postmodern choreography or experimental filmmaking or poetry, or those are the, when people ask me about like what other photographers or I draw from, it's like those are the other things that I draw from, and those feel like poetic influence. And so when people started talking about the work and kind of making comparisons to poetry, I felt really moved, because I was just like, whoa, I hadn't consciously set out to do that, but it felt really special.
Thank you. Maybe we think of it as the highest art form in this building. No. All right. Thank you so much for the conversation. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you.